I'm happy to be here in Budapest and to be a member of Hacktivity 2014. The following talk will describe some experiences of my daily work. Yeah, you've heard I work as a penetration tester in a company which it's called SYS. They exclusively offers professional penetration test, and that's my point of view. I'm not an IT manager, but I hope some of you are IT managers, and all the examples were found during real-life penetration test. During a normal penetration test, an amount of vulnerabilities were discovered. That's the usual case. And the main problem is after a penetration test, we have so much bugs, so much issues, but what has to be fixed firstly and what we can fix later. In that case, companies like measurements for their IT security, and the general topic is mostly a management requirement. It says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Have you even heard this sentence? Yeah, somehow know it. And also very often clients asking, please, can you classify our level of IT security, which have you found in our network, with a school grade? Well, that sounds good and it's easy to understand. But how is it possible to answer such a question? Let's use an example. What does the school grade of 4 in the German language say about the skill level? Maybe you know a guy or a lady that has a school grade of 4 in the German language. How good they can speak and understand German? Well, it depends who is requested. Because, for instance, in Germany, we have school grades from 1 to 6. 1 is the best and 6 the worst school grade. In Austria, it goes from 1 to 5. In Switzerland, the opposite, like in Germany. 6 is the best and 1 the worst. And I've read in Hungary, 5 is best school grade, isn't it? Yeah, okay. I've never been in Hungary at school. And also, if you know that thing, maybe you can expect a 4 in Hungary is much better than a 4 in Germany. But for a Hungarian people, German is not the native language, it's a foreign language, and usually a foreign language is spoken and understand not so fluent than the native language. So it says nothing. It's only an introduction that a simple score, like a school grade, itself says nothing. You need more knowledge. For instance, what's the native language of the pupil, what country, what the score means. And nowadays, if you're an IT manager, there are a lot of tasks like the following. The batteries in the smartphones are so empty, very quick. Or the company's website was in the media being vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Maybe one of your websites was in such a case in the media. Or the mobile computer of a board member has a virus. Nice topic. And there are a lot of other things. And the difficult question is, what is the highest risk issue? What has to be fixed firstly, what later? And the situation is that more or less security issues will be come on top daily. Therefore, I will introduce the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS. Who has even heard CVSS? Please raise up your hands. Okay, some. Who use CVSS for prioritization, for instance? Okay. Who knows how CVSS works? Oh, some hands, okay, but it's a minority. Well, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System provides an open framework for communication to characteristics and impacts of IT vulnerabilities, and it enables IT managers and other people to understand what is the IT vulnerability, and anybody can see what is the score, how was it derived. All these sentences are quoted from the official CVSS guide. So it sounds good. And It consists of 3 groups, so-called the base group, temporal metric group, and environmental metric group. And each group produces a score ranging from 0 to 10, and also a so-called vector. It's a textual representation of the score. The base metric group captures the characteristics of a vulnerability, and it is constant with time and across user environments. And you can use the temporal and environmental score to be more precise analyzing or classify a vulnerability, but however, this is not required. It is also printed in boldface on the original source. So there's a limitation of this torque. I will use only the base score if I mention CVSS. That's not against the official CVSS guide, and a lot of companies do it in the same case. And the base score, all scores should also be printed, not only the score itself, but also the vector. We will come on this. The first vector is a so-called access vector, EV. This matrix reflects how the vulnerability is exploited. For instance, you have to have a network access or you have a local access. There's a big difference. And there's a adjacent network called, for instance, if you have to have a local, the adjacent network, like the local IP subnet, or very close, like a Bluetooth connection, which cannot be used from here to, for instance, Vienna. It's not possible by Bluetooth. And the next part of the CVSS score is the access complexity. It describes how is it possible to exploit, and it can be high, medium, or low. And lower complexity means it's more or less easy. And it's also important to know, is there an authentication needed to exploit a vulnerability? For instance, none, it means no authentication is needed, or single, that's the typical way of authentication. You have to have one account. In some cases, you have to have multiple authentication. For instance, you have to log into operating system at first and later to the application itself. And you have 3 impacts for a vulnerability. For instance, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability impact. And all of these impacts can be classified with none, partial, or complete. It means you have no impact to confidentiality or complete impact of availability. And with all these things, the access complexity, authentication, the impacts of integrity, confidentiality, and availability, there is an amazing equation. Have you ever seen such an equation? That's from the official guide, it's not from me. And it sounds and looks like really science. However, there are a lot of adapters. It's also from their website. Some of them are also sponsors here, I think so. And the question is also, who creates the score? The official guide says it's not the user, it's mostly based from security, bulletin analysts, product vendors, or application vendors. Now, that's the first short summary for me. CVSS is a fundamental characteristics of a vulnerability. It's constant with time. It's specified from IT security experts, and it's calculated with a complex equation with really science, and it's adopted from many organizations. Let's have an example to see it in practice. Here, these are 2 vulnerabilities. Well, that's not the newest one, but 5 years ago, Microsoft published patches against 2 vulnerabilities. Both were remote code execution vulnerabilities. MS09-001 and MS09-004, both patches fixed a remote code execution vulnerability. Well, remote code execution, that's the most amazing vulnerability from attacker point of view. But the score is different. It's 10 for MS09001 and MS09004 has 9. Well, you see, 10 is higher than 9, so it's easy to understand. 10 is the highest possible value. You should deploy the patch first and later this one. And why? The authentication, AC, AU, single, you have to log into a SQL server before you can exploit it. But in the SMB service, authentication, none. There's no authentication needed. That's the reason that the score is higher. It's possible to understand. And next, there are also two vulnerabilities which are more or less identical. And CVE 2012-6606 and CVE 2014-2735, both software products did not validate the X509 certificate correctly, and it was possible to perform a man-in-the-middle attack. However, both vulnerabilities were discovered by myself, and especially the response time from WinSCP was great. Is anybody from WinSCP here in the audience, maybe? No. Because people are from the Czech Republic, I think so. But I had a great response time. I wrote a mail, and maybe a couple of days later, they released a new version. The Palo Alto networks took some months. Well, however, the question is, what has to be fixed? Firstly, if you have a vulnerable FTP client and a vulnerable VPN client, the score is the same, 5.8, 5.8. Well, you can now look into the temporal metric score. The question for temporal metric is there an exploit available? Well, the same vulnerability, you can use the same exploit, it doesn't help. The environmental score reflects how is it for your specific environment of your IT infrastructure. In worst case, if a software product is missing the core function, somebody will lost his life. This is not the case for both software products, I hope so. But for instance, or mostly a VPN client, if you capture the credentials with a man-in-the-middle attack, you can result more trouble than only with an FTP client. So I would recommend to fix the VPN client first and the FTP client as second, if you have these both vulnerabilities to fix. Well, now we have a summary in practice. CVSS, the base score, is enough to analyze or to prioritize vulnerabilities. A higher score needs a higher priority and a lower score needs a lower priority. And there's also an interesting point, as a lot of organizations and companies use such signs with the CVSS. Nobody will make a mistake if you use CVSS. Nobody will make a false decision. And you can also use different tools or penetration tester. Well, I work as a penetration tester to identify IT security issues, and that's a good point. So everything is okay? Why you are here in this talk? I will now introduce a known limitation of CVSS. That's cross-site scripting. This kind of vulnerability is on a huge amount of websites available. However, the official CVSS guide says about cross-site scripting, the impact to user systems could be much greater than the impact to the target host. However, this is an indirect impact. Cross-site scripting vulnerabilities should be scored with no impact to confidentiality or availability and partial impact to integrity. That's from the official CVSS guide. So, on a lot of websites, you need an account, username and password, and the browser asks you, if you use it first time, should I store the credentials in my browser store? I believe all of you have seen such situations. Only if you use the browser only in the privacy mode, then the browser doesn't support this feature. But if you don't use the browser in the privacy or in private mode, you will ask for it. However, maybe not all here know that with cross-site scripting, it is possible to read out the credentials which are stored in the browser. I performed such a successful cross-site scripting attack against stored passwords for a client last month. It's still possible, be sure. And this should not be an impact on confidentiality. You can read out the password. I say no. And cross-site scripting illustrates the problem. CVSS is focused on the target host, but IT security has to cover solutions. For instance, if it's possible to find an XSS vulnerability at signinebay.com to read out the stored credentials from user browsers, do you think that there's no impact on confidentiality for eBay? Well, it's true, there is no impact for the host which provides the website signinebay.com because the browsers are compromised. But nobody asks for the host, the solution is in focus. And that's only one limitation. Now, I will come to another point, that the base score is constant. That's from the official definition of CVSS. It means the base score is constant. Sometimes the temporal score can be changed. For instance, if an exploit is available or not, then the temporal score will be changed, but the base score is constant over time. In 2012, there was a security issue with the Windows Partition Manager. It was possible to escalate privileges. The National Institute of Standards and Technology scored it with 7.2, and Tenable Nessus classified it with 6.9. Well, both are official adopters of CVSS for years, and yeah, they should, from the official guide, use the same score. But Tenable used the access complexity with medium, and NIST classified it with low. So that's a difference. So it resulted in different score numbers. Or maybe that's an exception. But let's now look to identical vulnerabilities. 3 years ago, there was an interesting kind of attack discovered, a so-called plain text command injection. Let me explain what does it mean. Some protocols like IMAP or SMTP has the possibility to switch from an unencrypted protocol to an encrypted protocol during the same TCP stream. Especially for SMTP, start TLS is very often activated. Who knows the start TLS a little bit and have heard about it, that you can switch between an unencrypted protocol to an encrypted protocol during the same TCP stream. It's possible also for other protocols like POP3 or NNTP, but mostly for SMTP it's in use. However, the official announcement for the first found vulnerable product, it was postfix. It also said it may be affected by other protocols. It was found with postfix, but the researcher detected it's in the TLS protocol in the switching from unencrypted to encrypted, so maybe other protocols will have the same issue. And not surprising me, other protocols and products were found with a similar vulnerability, like FTP. Also in 2011, FTP service with implement start TLS. It's there called off TLS, but it's typical the same. The problem is, during the unencrypted way, it's possible to inject additional commands from an attacker point of view, and the response will received from over the encrypted channel after the encryption is performed. So the client thinks, oh, this is original from me, that's the original response for request from me. But it was spoofed during the clear text phase, not after the encryption was performed. So that's a bug. I have not go more in detail because what's about the score? For SMTP, Tenable and also Red Hat scored with 4 for SMTP. NIST scored with 6.8. That's a difference, and also access complexity high or medium. For FTP, the situation is different. Tenable and NIST also have 5.8, and Red Hat 4. You have a more or less similar vulnerability, and you have a range of score from 4 to 6.8. It depends who was the score creates and what they think about access complexity. That's mostly the biggest difference, but not all. Okay, now I will use another similar issue, CVE 2003-1491 and 2004-1473. Some firewalls can be bypassed with a UDP source port of 53, and maybe you believe it or not, sometimes it's possible in 2014. However, Tenable, the producer from the security scanner Nessus, score both with 7.5, but the National Institute of Standards and Technology score one with 7.5, the other one only with 5, because the integrity impact and availability impact was scored with none instead of partial. It's the same. You can recognize for something behind a firewall if you use UDP packets with a source port of 53, but NIST, in one case, they scored in that way or in that way. Don't ask me why. That's only the current situation. Another issue, SSL with version 2. Tenable classified this issue with 5 and NIST also with 5. SSL version 2 is an ancient encryption protocol. On more or less all browsers, it's disabled by default, but it's very often enabled by default server-side. And if you like to handle credit card data on a website, you have to have a PCI DSS certification, and you will not get the certificate if your web server supports this ancient encryption protocol. However, very often there are so many vulnerabilities and people say, oh, we have so much tasks, we will have a look only to vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 7 or more. So in that case, SSL version 2 will not be covered because it's lower than 7. But have a look, it's not the same score. The number is the same, but the vector is different. For here, Tenable classified the confidentiality impact with partial, but NIST classified confidentiality impact to none. But NIST classified the integrity impact to partial, and Tenable says integrity impact, no, there is no impact. Don't ask me why, but that's the current situation. And Rapid7, the producer for Metasploit, they classify the access complexity with medium instead of low. So they scored with 5.8. You have 3 different scores for the same vulnerability. And it's a showstopper for your business if you like to handle credit card data on your website. I have more examples with bad crypto. MD5-based signatures in TLS. There's a nice presentation on the screen outside with interesting screenshots. However, this old bug is classified with 5 from Rapid7 and NIST, from Rapid7 and NIST, from Rapid and Red Hat has 4.3, and Tenable only 4. And you have also complexity, access complexity, medium, low, or high. Choose what you want. That's CVSS. The usage of RC4. You have also 2.6 or 4.3 or a vulnerability called crime. It's a compression ratio info leak made easy attack. I think it's not so made easy, but it's possible. And you have a lot of different scores for identical vulnerabilities. Or a weak RSA key. It means if you have an RSA key with less than 2048 bits, Tenable says there's a low risk, but no CVSS score is provided for this issue. Rapid 7, for instance, they classify it with 3.2. And now I will come to one of the biggest IT security issues. It's referenced with CVE 2014-0160. Who knows what it is? No. It was the first issue which has its own symbol, and the vulnerability is known as SSL Heartbleed. It was in spring this year. And yeah, from my point of view, it was the first vulnerability with its own symbol. NIST, Red Hat, and Rapid7 classified with a score of 5.0. Tenable scored with 9.4. And the difference is integrity and availability impact were classified from NIST, Red Hat, and Rapid7 with none, but integrity impact was classified as complete from Tenable, and also the confidentiality impact was classified as complete, but the others say only partial. However, I've heard Bruce Schneier was here at Hacktivity 1 or 2 years ago, and he said on his blog, catastrophic is the right word on a scale from 1 to 10, this is an 11. I know that Schneier is not mentioned against CVSS directly, but I will misinterpret this phrase against CVSS. Sorry, Bruce. But that's the good point. If you have a scale from 1 to 10, this is out of the scale. He means 11. But we also have a more recent big issue, and that's called shell shock. It has the reference number CVE 2014-6271. There are some more CVE numbers, but this is the main CVE number. And Red Hat scored it with 7.5. However, NIST and Tenable 2 scored it with 10. And it's also a difference, the integrity impact, the availability impact, and the confidentiality impact are classified as complete or partial. However, Tenable wrote a mail a couple of weeks ago. The issue is potentially more severe than Heartbleed. If you think about Bruce Schneier, he means Heartbleed has 11. Now you use 12, 14, 100? I don't know. It's enough for the base score is not the same for one from different product vendors or vulnerability scanner vendors. Another point is the base score is constant over time. 3 years ago, there was an interesting bug found in OpenSSL, and it's possible to perform a denial of service attack. I can confirm it's possible to switch off big servers with big bandwidth with one client with low bandwidth. I did it several times because clients doesn't believe it. Then I say, well, I can demonstrate this. And then they said, oh, yeah, the server was not available anymore. However, what is about the score? NIST classified this vulnerability with 5. Red Hat used 4.3. But it's more interesting with Tenable. I work a lot with Tenable, or with Nessus, and they had now 4.3. From April 2012 until an unknown date for me, they had access complexity classified as high. Now it's low or medium. And there was a discussion also. Then they switched it also to low. It was 7.8. The same vulnerability was scored between 2.6 and 7.8. If you have this vulnerability, which score do you use? Are you confused? Me too. But now I have the 10th crypto bug for today, and this will be the last one. I hope you will not be tired. The so-called OpenSSL change cipher specification vulnerability. It allows a man-in-the-middle attack if both sides use a vulnerable version of OpenSSL. And NIST and Rapid7 scored this vulnerability with 6.8. Red Hat and Tenable on June 6th this year scored with 5.8, But Tenable, at least since 18th of June, scored with 9.3, and there's a nice detection. That's the block from Tenable, where they introduce this string. And here it's not so good to read. It's not possible to read for the screen resolution. There's a screenshot of the found weakness with their vulnerability scanner, and here the CVSS base score is printed with 5.8. And if you go to this link, that's the recent version of the same output. Here you can see that's the base score which is used from Tenable now. It's much higher than 5.8. So now I will have a first conclusion to CVSS. At first, the base score is not constant over time. I think you have seen it because there are some examples. And also, the base score will be classified different from different parties. Well, you should use only one source for your CVSS, and you should also use a specific date because it's also changing from one vendor during the time. Now, we will have an example. And we will use only the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We have some vulnerabilities, at least 4. I have the CVE numbers, the score, and the vector. What should be fixed firstly? What do you think? If you go to score, this one has the highest score. It should be fixed first, then that, and at last, this one. However, the first is the .tls plain text command injection. That's the OpenSSL change cipher spec vulnerability. That's the vulnerable SCP or FTP client which is not validating X509 certificates, and that's SSL Heartbleed. But SSL Heartbleed is one of the biggest issues. It should be fixed firstly and not in that set of fixing. So it's totally crazy. It doesn't help for prioritization. And maybe you remember that especially Tenable is classifying Heartbleed and also OpenSSL change cipher spec vulnerability with a higher score than others. The next example is with the help of Nessus. You should improve the IT security of a FTP service which supports TLS by decreasing the CVSS score. Maybe there are 4 vulnerabilities in the FTP service. The first one, that's the SSL renegotiation vulnerability, where you can switch off the server. The second is the plain text command injection for FTP. The FTP server is based on OpenSSL, so it's possible to use the OpenSSL change cipher spec vulnerability, and the server also supports the RC4 encryption algorithm, which should not be used anymore. However, is anybody here who knows a very easy solution to decrease the CVSS? Any idea? Well, you can fix all these ports, but these are different. Here you have to update OpenSSL. Here you have to update the FTP service, and here you have to update the encryption settings. Maybe for OpenSSL or for the FTP server, it depends on the configuration. Different stories, different tasks, but the most easy solution is disable encryption. You don't believe it? Have a look. FTP supports clear text encryption. It's recommended to use FTPS or SSH or whatever, but the base score is only 2.6. Do you really think that will increase your IT security. And that's similar with other protocols like Telnet or IMAP or POP3. All these unencrypted protocols have a base score of 2.6, and so if such a service, there is no problem. With SMTP, the situation is more strange. SMTP without .tls, it means SMTP or mails will be sent and received without encryption. This is not scored, for instance, from Tenable Nessus. However, in Germany, we have regulatory authorities of data protection. I don't know if anybody is similar here in Hungary, but last month, in September, they checked mail servers from companies. And if a mail server, for instance, was not supporting .tls, they wrote an automatic letter to the direct management. You have to have enabling a .tls for encryption because we are aware for privacy and for data protection, and they treat a fine for 50,000 euro, these are more than 15 million forints, if it will not be possible during 6 weeks. If you are an IT manager and your CEO is have such a letter in your hands, do you really think you can say, oh no, we don't have a problem with our SMTP server. I checked it with a security scanner and there's no score available or only 2.6? That's a big botch. That's totally crazy. And now my final conclusion is, you have to have knowledge of vulnerabilities and then you can prioritize. But the score is no help. It's crazy. It's totally senseless. And if knowledge is available, nobody needs a score. I can say, congratulations, you are here at Hacktivity to improve your knowledge of IT security, but maybe you can follow my line of thought, but you say, yeah, you should not use how much time is available. Is anybody here? I'm not sure. 10 minutes. Okay. That's enough. I can strongly recommend not to use CVSS. If you're a manager, don't use it for prioritization because it doesn't help. The examples should be enough. I used mostly examples where a lot of people have heard about it, for instance, Heartbleed, Shellshock, and others. But if you have more complex vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities you've never heard it, you don't understand, then the score is the same botch. If you're a researcher, do not use CVSS for promoting your found vulnerability. I've heard such things. Oh, I've discovered an urgent issue. It was scored with 6.9 or similar like this. That's crazy. Don't do it. And if you provide security bulletins, please do not use CVSS score because it's not helpful. And yeah, what now? Should we improve CVSS like there's a preview of version 3 available? I've read the draft and not only one of the problems will be solved, so the answer is no. Or should we use another scoring system like the common weakness scoring system? No. Or should we develop a new scoring system? There are a lot of scoring systems available, and I say also no, because the problem is scoring is a technology. And I found a nice sentence on the website of Bruce Schneier, and I will quote it again. If you think technology can solve your problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand the technology. Yeah, maybe everything is possible to understand, but your management said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And what do you do in that situation? Now, it's not related direct to IT security, but it's a management topic. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I found an interesting article on the Forbes website, and the Forbes website itself claimed that's the world business leaders' information. So, and the article was, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. No, that was not the headline. The headline was, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, not true. And I quote some sentence of the website, it's even worth to read it. The important stuff can't be measured. Or measurement is our drug in the business world. Or measurement is our opiate of choice in the business world. They don't talk about security, but they talk about management methods and that we like to measure everything, but it doesn't help. It doesn't also help for IT security with CVSS. And now, with the short information from this Forbes article, from the information of the World Business Leader, I have my conclusion. If data IT security is important, then it cannot be measured. Well, if IT security is not important, so you can be stoned from your scores, feel happy, but don't believe you will increase the level of IT security. Or an easy to remember slogan, use it and you will lose it. It means use scores like CVSS, but you will lose IT security. That's it. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, please contact me here in the conference or by mail, if you like, with PGP encrypted, because I like to improve security, and please do not use CVSS. Thank you, and I wish you a glad